Welcome to Fill the Void podcast, where we discuss unhealthy human habits caused by the society of consumption. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, where we delve into the world of psychedelics and its potential in mental health and wellness. Today, we have the honor of hosting Michael Brotherton. Michael has been a pivotal figure in advancing the understanding and application of psychedelics for therapeutic purposes. Michael sheds light on legal and regulatory challenges and offers valuable advice for individuals interested in exploring psychedelics for therapeutic use. I want to give a warm, big welcome to Michael Brotherton. Thank you for being here. Michael is the founder of Dragonfly, that is a psychedelic retreat and wellness institute, and also founder of Dragonfly 44 Capital, which supports the growth and development of wellness companies, mental health, and longevity. First of all, can you tell us about your journey and what motivated you to become a specialist in psychedelics?
Yeah. Okay. So I spent my undergrad career focusing on neuropsychopharmacology. I was always just interested in drugs and how they
Mm-hmm.
affect the brain. I ended up sort of taking a pivot and going into endocrinology research for some time. At that point in time, I was really interested in gene editing, and there was a lab that was using CRISPR. So I sort of directed my focus there and found myself in this endocrinology lab for a few years. And then I got a business degree on top of my degree and really, wanted to eventually pivot into the business world. I wanted to take a break from things for some time and ended up actually going into food and events and cooking and started a company where we're doing these high-end experiential events for corporate clients throughout New York. And then COVID hit, and
Mm-hmm.
we sort of decided to get away from that. And I took my experience and degrees and got a job at a healthcare focused investment bank. And the bank is focused in really two sectors. It was mainly healthcare and biotech, but then there was also an aspect of the bank that was raising a lot of capital for crypto companies.
Mm-hmm.
And right when I was there, the bank was put on an IPO for Compass Pathways, and Compass Pathways is a company that develops psilocybin, and is currently in the process of getting their form of psilocybin approved to the FDA. So we got on that IPO, and I had interest in psychedelics for some time just by the way that they've really affected me. I would say,
Mm-hmm.
there was a point in my life where I was very socially withdrawn, and I started seeing some of the early research come out around the benefits of psychedelics. And I think that was enough of a narrative shift to allow me to start using those experiences for more of a positive change. So,
Yeah.
so I had some of my own personal experience, and then also on the board of a family foundation. So I started early before I was at the bank directing some of the grants that we would give to organizations like MAPS and built these relationships. So when I saw that we were on this Compass Pathways IPO and I had a bit of a network built out, I decided to approach management of the bank and say that, listen, this is something I really want to focus on building out. And I was able to pitch it as, there's a lot of similarities with the crypto sector as far as
Mm-hmm.
being a bit of a community. A lot of companies were first listed in Canada and wanted to start forming relationships with US based banks. So I was able to sort of sell it in that way. And
Mm-hmm.
and then we built out, a team to focus on the research side and a bit of a banking team. And by the time I was done there, we had research coverage on 7 different companies within the sector. And we had 36 different banking relationships with companies that were, psychedelic adjacent. Some of them were non-psychedelic compounds derived from psychedelics. Some of them were just mental health focused companies, but
Mm-hmm.
we developed a lot of relationships over that time. And there was, I'd say, back in January of this year, There was
Yes.
I lost sort of one of my main champions on the banking side that was supporting this, and there was a bit of a strategic pivot away from the sector internally within my bank. So I saw an opportunity to go out on my own and make the best use of some of these contacts.
Mm-hmm.
In the background, I had also, which is also another sort of impetus for me being able to leave, I've been approached about a project in the Caribbean and introduced to my current partner now, Roy, who had acquired a license within St. Vincent and the Grenadines to basically legally administer psychedelics. So we've been working along with the government for the past year or so to
Mm-hmm.
develop a legislative framework. And why this is so important and interesting is because there's other places throughout the world that have psychedelic retreats and are administering psychedelics, so in Mexico, in Costa Rica, in Jamaica, but none of these countries have developed an actual legislative framework to
Mm-hmm.
allow it to be incorporated under UNICP. So UNICP is sort of like this international drug standard, and they have drugs
Okay.
are allowed or restricted under this convention. And by creating legislation, we're almost like developing an FDA within this country where
Yeah.
certain actors or groups involved in this process can develop drugs. We can approve certain drugs and we could administer them. So we've been working with the government to create something like that. And we're currently in contract to purchase an island resort down there.
Nice. I will go back to the regulations part because I'm really interested. But how did the idea of like Dragonfly Retreat come about? And what sets it apart from other psychedelic retreats that already exist? And what are the experiences that this will offer?
Yeah, so we still don't have it yet. So there's nothing going yet, but we have a vision and plan of what we want to do there. And I really want to develop a program that's focused on human optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this narrative is really important for people to have their first experiences. I was just down an investor trip 2 weeks ago on a boat that one of our investors has, and there was a lawyer on the trip.
Mm-hmm.
And the lawyer had never used psychedelics in his life. It was sort of he didn't want to use them recreationally, and he didn't feel like he really had anything wrong with them. So he couldn't get the
Mm-hmm.
idea of why he should be using them. And then I described, our vision for the place, which is really it's based around human optimization. I think that psychedelics are like these non-specific amplifiers that can really they take you out of your current frame of thinking, and then they put your brain in this hyperplastic state. And in
Mm-hmm.
that plastic state post psychedelic experience, you can really start to change habits and change behaviors. So when I was able to describe and frame this in human optimization, he all of a sudden was able to wrap his head around using psychedelics and
Yeah.
the psychedelic experience with the group on that boat, and it totally opened up his mind. And these are really the type of experiences I want to have and curate. And I think that, regardless, people like traumas are going to come up and experiences
Mm-hmm.
are going to come up, and you're going to have things to face and work on. But by framing it as you're improving yourself rather than, we're doing this for depression or something else deep. I think you're allowing people to get into even better headspaces. And what we really want to do is incorporate a lot of uh, health optimization stuff into that. So, how people start focusing on tracking metrics and improving their sleep and starting to eat better and work
Mm-hmm.
out better and all of these things synergistically combine to get themselves feeling better, and then they feel better about these experiences that they have.
Super interesting. Yeah. And in this fast paced world, it's like we need these spaces to be able to go into these places, the void, which I call it. And does Dragonfly or the vision in the vision, will it offer like a role of integration and support post retreat?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, there's we're sort of framing it off of a few existing models of retreats that provide a bit of preparation support at the beginning. So the process should start long before you get down there, where you
Hmm.
learn about these things, you learn about what can happen, you learn about the experience, you learn about the different medicines that we'll be offering, and you start to frame and get yourself in this mental process of really what you want to work on. And I think just by doing some of these exercises and having these conversations, you're able to prime the brain for that change. So we want the process to begin before, and then similarly after. We want to, like, I want to, I think I sort of mentioned this before, but integrate wearables and start collecting data and see what metrics people can improve on, but then also, yeah,
Ah,
provide that support. And I think the important thing, from talking to other groups and operators out there as far as integration goes is that each case is very different. So for the
yeah,
majority of people, you really just want to provide support and a bit of coaching and a bit of guidance and really try to maximize the positive experience that they have. But then a small set of people are going to have something really difficult and challenging that comes up. And
yeah,
in those cases, we want to be able to triage them and then provide the deeper psychological or even psychiatric medical interventions that may be needed to support any type of difficult things that come up, and be willing to identify those cases so that people don't feel. I think the worst case scenario is if someone, like 2 3 weeks later has something
hmm,
dark that comes up and they feel like they're completely forgotten about, and then that could really compound about on itself and lead to a bad outcome. So we need to find ways to, continually interact with people that have these experiences, maximize the positive benefits, and then for the small subset of cases that have really challenging or difficult experiences, we provide as much ongoing support as necessary so that people feel supported.
good, amazing. And how do you prioritize the safety and ensure that everything is supportive in the environment for all the individuals participating in the psychedelic retreats?
Yeah, so I mean, part of it is having really the systems in place. I'd say that there's kind of two sides to this.
Hmm.
There's the psychological safety,
Yeah,
and there's the feeling of being safe and being allowed, allowing yourself to get into a different headspace. And I think part of that is what makes this private island aspect of this really interesting, because you feel like like no one from the outside is going to be walking on or is going to see
uh,
interrupt these experiences. So just that in and of itself, I think, allows for a safety of mind.
yeah.
Uh, the Another part of this, I think, is the medical safety and support. And this is part of what we've been working along with the government, because we want to ensure that anyone who operates down in this country has the same protocols and standards in place. We need to have medical facilities. We need to have the ability to intervene medically and stop some of his experiences if need be.
Hmm.
Be very rare cases, but we need to have the ability to do that and have the medical ability to stop trips. And I don't know. I think that's some of the limitations that we're seeing with some of the state models is they can't really prescribe or give any type of medical intervention. So that's something that we can really build out.
Hmm.
And then it's having all the right staff there. So having people who eh, have had a lot of these psychedelic experiences in depth and gone through those challenging experiences and are there as sitters to be able to
Yeah,
watch. It's so important to, if someone's going through an absolute challenging experience and they could look at a guide or look at a sitter who can just sit there and
yeah,
observe that experience with full confidence, knowing that they'll be okay, and mirror that within your head that you're going to be okay. So having those people that have had those experience, that's important. It's
Yeah.
having a medical staff there, just knowing that there's a medical staff there. It's having a psychiatric staff there. It's having a group of psychologists there. So knowing just from the start, people know that they're going to be supported on all of these different levels, I think is very important.
Hmm.
And then the last piece I'll sort of add to that safety and feeling of safety is I think that we really need to have adequate groups and types of people who can meet people psychologically where they're at in their life. And I think that's something that I definitely appreciate and have been through a number of the, like, let's say, like ayahuasca retreats down in Peru,
Hmm.
where I've gotten a lot of benefit and people get a lot of benefit out of. I think sort of the limitation there is there's a bit of a cultural separation between, people that live and function in Western cultures to sort of make that jump between these indigenous practices. And I
Yeah.
think we can, if you create a program that's really meeting people culturally and individually where they're at, I think that provides a whole additional layer of safety of mind that can
Totally.
positive outcomes in these experiences.
Totally. Yeah, I even did myself like one of these psychedelic retreats, but in New York City. And I remember I could hear the cars running outside the window. So the concept of being on an island, I think it's incredible. And so how effective like has psychedelic therapy been in treating substance abuse and drug addiction, for example? What
Yeah,
role do they play?
yeah. I mean, very interesting, and this is why I think that different psychedelics have very different uses when you're looking at treating things.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a couple that I think are very interesting for substance use disorders, and if I sort of start with like resetting someone and getting someone back, especially for opiate use disorder, ibogaine is a very, very, very interesting drug. It has sort of this kappa opioid agonist activity that almost resets the opioid receptors. So people who are extremely tolerant to opioids go in and have an ibogaine experience, and normally where withdrawal period can be extended depending on what type of opioid they're on, up to like a month. It resets them in one 48-hour
Hmm.
experience. And ibogaine is really interesting too. It sort of seems to like play this narrative of your life and everything that's happened in front of your eyes and allows you to really, I don't know, ground and reset yourself. It's almost like this big reset for the brain. It seems to be effective for really any type of addiction, but I think like really, really important for opioid use disorder. So yeah, that's one.
Hmm.
I think that the empathogens and entheogens are also very useful for a lot of addiction disorders in the framework of psychedelic assisted therapy. So, a lot of people with substance use or alcohol use disorder typically like tend to have a comorbidity with PTSD. And,
Hmm.
MAPS has shown some really great evidence for the effectiveness of MDMA combined with therapy for treating PTSD. And why I think this is a real interesting one is people who are living in this sort of trauma state of mind are constantly reliving their trauma, and it has this real physiological response of fear attached to it that then puts them in this hyper fear state. and
Yeah.
and MDMA, like what it's been sort of demonstrated and I think is really happening is you're allowed to reprocess these memories without the associated fear. And memories really aren't this stagnant thing. There's something that we're constantly recreating. Along with therapy, if you're allowed to rewrite these memories without fear, you're allowed to really process a lot of that trauma. So I think that MDMA and entheogens, specifically when they're paired with therapy, are another very important tool to process that trauma. And then just like, typical psychedelics have shown a lot of promise in alcohol use disorder, and I think really allowing people to reset and reframe the way that they view certain substances. So, higher dose psilocybin or LSD experiences can allow people to really reframe how they view these substances. And then just what the research shows, you can just see how these experiences like lead you to confront some of the issues and bring them to really the forefront of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's like this post psychedelic plastic state of your brain that allows you to start to introduce new behaviors. I know for myself, like every big experience I've had has put me in this frame of mind of I want to start taking care of myself more. I want to start exercising or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, you can either take advantage of that state or you can sort of have these realizations and leave it. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I think it's important to have that support. And I think the support needs to come from many different angles, like especially for addiction in some of these cases. I think it needs to come from you need to have the coaches and the guides and the therapists that are allowing you to continue to improve on your behaviors. But then I think you really also need the communal support. Like all of this stuff is kind of worthless if you're going back to your same community
Yeah.
is using all of these destructive behaviors. Like our thoughts, feelings, everything is so shaped by the people that we're around.
Yeah.
And and
Completely.
and and the way that you feel and everything is shaped in ways that you can't even perceive by everyone that you're surrounding yourself with. So, like, having that support in finding a different community is really important. I know for me personally, it was experiences at Burning Man and finding a Burning Man community that really allowed me to it was like it's like finding a community that's like using psychedelics responsibly and still working on their careers and their lives and improving themselves and taking care of themselves in every way and finding that was really vital to me. And I think like eh, developing more community support like this, I think, will be essential for people with substance use disorder because you need support from your friends and community, and it's also good to have you know positive support and change from some of these substances. So those
Yeah.
two things combined, I think creates some real magic.
Yeah, Burning Man is that you see other side of the world, which is people that are functioning in the system and doing other things, but take this week every year to go into this other focus of the world. It's like the only place in the world that allows you to be able to do that fully. Um, I think it's great. Like psychedelics, it's basically instead of escaping and running away from the things, just going in and processing, which is the most important. So, how do you integrate traditional therapeutic approaches with psychedelics to aid addiction recovery, for example? And
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that and it's a good question as far as which approach is best. Um, I think that
and another question to add to this, like, how do you foresee the integration of psychedelic therapy in the mainstream treatments in the coming years?
yes. All right. So I'll sort of start with, I guess, therapy systems. I'll just touch on that a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that sort of the two big standout ones that people are using with psychedelic therapy are CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and then internal family systems. And, I think CBT is really developed because it really fit into it fit really well in the model of assessing depression scores and assessing anxiety scores and improving on those particular scores. Whether it's best, I'm not really sure. IFS seems to be a very interesting system. And I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really too trained on a lot of these, but IFS seems to be very interesting. I think that once again, it's really just incorporating with whatever system each individual is currently working with, and then having those providers start to incorporate those systems. I think that a lot of psychedelic support and integration really is just having someone sort of be present and mirror some of these things and frame them in a bit of a positive way. And not really, I think there's real danger here with psychedelics and therapy, I think, with therapists imposing their own beliefs and own belief systems here. And
Hmm.
I think it's really important to just sort of meet someone where they're at and slightly shift all of these things to a positive direction and allow people to come to those conclusions themselves and really just hold a safe container. So I don't know, a balance of all those things, continuing
Hmm.
the therapy system that you're working with, making sure that therapists aren't being all that guiding and influential in these experiences and allowing people to sort of figure that out where they are. Now, for the second question, as far as how these systems will be built out, specifically with addiction treatment, I think it's an important consideration. It's also a really good opportunity here. Like people are sort of, as these drugs are developing and as we're reaching potential FDA approval for a lot of these things, people are thinking about how, I mean, specifically how psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is going to be able to be built out. And I think there's a real important sort of space that's already been created here for with addiction treatment. So you already have people who are inpatient and living in these facilities and
Yeah,
facilities all over the country. So as far as worrying about like people being in a safe space or having to go for a duration of a trip or having to sit with a therapist, it's all figured out within. I think
exactly.
I think there's like three different areas where it's sort of figured out. It's the addiction treatment facilities, it's eating disorder clinics
Yeah.
and facilities, and then it's end of life care facilities. So all of those three, and then I guess it's like veterans care facilities for PT.
Hmm.
So all four of those pillars are already sort of built out. And that's why I think it's great when I see companies in the drug development side that are looking at substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder as an indication first, because I think it takes the question out of how do we build out these systems? They're already built. And some of these are like, like I think the real interesting model from a business perspective is to look at facilities that are already profitable, semi-profitable, operating, have some continuing power, and improve upon them by adding these psychedelic systems on top of the existing operations. And I think that we'll see better outcomes. You can improve a bit on the margins depending on how you set it up. So I think it's really a great model, and I want to see more companies focus on this indication rather than just going for like major depressive disorder or treatment resistant depression, because it seems to be a bit crowded right now.
Hmm. And it's already happening, this integration to these like facilities that already exist, or it's yet to come.
So it's already happening outside of the country. So there's organizations like Beyond in Mexico that have really carved out a niche with treating addiction. It's happening a bit within the United States. So there's a couple ketamine clinics that
Hmm.
have developed these alcohol use disorder protocols and are working with ketamine for alcohol use disorder and in a specific container. And then on, an initial grounds level, there are a few groups in the US that are currently acquiring existing facilities with the hope to start integrating those practices. So yeah, I'm not really aware of any existing specific facilities that are have full on incorporated ketamine.
Okay.
Ketamine's really the only thing they'd be able to incorporate right now.
Hmm.
Uh, there's this sort of state model that's being built out where they're developing state by state legislation for using psychedelics for certain things, and there's a real limitation here because it's not under the FDA approval umbrella. So medical facilitators are a bit at risk of losing their license, and you can't really prescribe other medications. So there's limitations with that state model. So you really want to, for existing medical treatment facilities, go under
I
the
see.
FDA model.
Mm-hmm.
And so all you can really work with right now is ketamine off label, which is a little, unless you have a real true like alcohol use disorder protocol in place, it's a little just because
Okay.
ketamine has its own abuse liability attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really important tool to be able to use in a clinical setting because it can get people in sort of this positive state of mind and change someone's narrative to be able to start
Mm-hmm.
working on themselves. But
Yeah.
it does have a bit of an abuse liability, so those protocols haven't really been figured out yet, and to just sort of be using it off label ad hoc, there's a bit of a risk there. But
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of how I would do it, is I would acquire one of these facilities, I would develop an alcohol use disorder protocol container for treating this, and then it looks like, we're gonna see FDA approval of MDMA assisted therapy sometime within 2024.
Wow.
And then start integrating that, and then, 2025, 2026, we'll see an approval for psilocybin, and then I would start integrating that and everything else that comes down the road.
Nice. And so now I want to like address this, like how do you address the legal and regulatory challenges associated with all these psychedelic therapies, and what changes will happen? Like regarding Dragonfly, that you're still in the process. When do you foresee that this is going to be launched?
Yeah. So, yes. So we currently have a license. So we're still like looking to solidify ownership of this property. But let's say we were to get ownership of it today and to
Mm-hmm.
the resort, we could start operating right away, because we have a research license attached.
Ah, okay.
We have research protocols. Legislation is on its way to being approved. They're, finishing the final draft of this legislation as we speak. We submitted our notes a couple weeks ago. So ideally, I would like to see that, but we can also sort of get going right away legally as long as we have research protocols attached to what we're doing.
Good. Okay.
As
So,
yeah,
yes.
I was just gonna say, as far as in the US, it's a bit different and things are a bit slower, and it's really interesting what's happening, though. I touched a bit on it before as far as the difference between
Yeah.
the different state legislature programs and then like overall national FDA approval. And then, I recently learning that even with that FDA approval, it comes with its own caveats. So in the beginning, states still sort of have to go along with this rescheduling and allowing doctors to prescribe it. So California sort of got ahead of themselves and jumped the gun, which is really cool. We saw
Okay.
something passed a couple weeks ago where they said that if there is a federal rescheduling of drugs, we're going to allow doctors to prescribe these medicines.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, even if there is a federal rescheduling, so right now, MDMA, psilocybin, they're all Schedule One drugs,
Mm-hmm.
which really means that there really isn't any type of medical use, and there's a high abuse liability. So whether that's in reality with how these drugs operate, I don't believe it is, but whether or not that is, that's how they're scheduled, and there's a number of restrictions that go along with it. So even with this sort of federal rescheduling, there still is a state by state agreement of that needs to take place. And I think we're just going to see certain states move along with that really quick, and other states take their time.
Yeah.
And eventually, with full FDA approval, we'll see it across the board. But it's going to take sort of piece by piece. So it'll likely be, like I said, MDMA first, and then psilocybin, and then other things down.
Okay. Good. So thank you, Michael. And my last question is, what advice would you give to people interested in exploring psychedelics for therapeutic purposes, and what precautions should they take?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Because, it's right now it's difficult. It's difficult finding a network. A lot of the experienced providers and practitioners are underground and have been working underground.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's finding these communities. I would say there's a lot of public facing resources that you can go to, and depending on where you are, look for those. Maps is a really great resource. Yeah, look for any community events that are taking place within your area. Within New York, we have the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, which is really good at providing support. We have the Psychedelic Athenaeum, which is like a library and has a lot of support protocols and resources. But really, like, find your local community, and within that community, start to ask questions and start to figure out who the experienced underground providers are,
Mm-hmm.
um, and go from there. But I'd say there's still a lot of risk involved in that. You really want to find someone who is aligned with you and aligned with your own particular values, and use whatever community resources you can to vet people. You know, post psychedelic experience or during
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic experience, I would say a really great resource is the Fireside Project. They have a free hotline. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but you can
Mm-hmm.
call anytime for support throughout an experience or integration support afterwards. And a lot of people volunteer there, and they're looking to really grow and expand. They have the capability to help out. But it's really important to find that specialist who's aligned with you, and that's why we need to see more federal approval. We need to see more of these things
Yeah.
light and get practitioners and providers more experience and have more training programs. But even then, I'd say a lot of these training programs are fairly inadequate because people aren't undertaking the psychedelic experiences themselves. And I think this is a really important aspect, to provide that psychological safety to someone who's undergoing this experience, just in case something challenging comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, like, once you do find that community and once you do find that network, like, it's something to ask if someone has personal experience with the things that they're using. It's something that I personally believe is very valuable in guiding someone. And yeah, so find out if they've had experience, see if you can talk to anyone else that these practitioners have worked with, figure out how long they've been working, make sure that, anywhere that you're going is a safe place where you're going to feel
Mm-hmm.
safe and comfortable, and make sure that your support network is there and knows what you're doing and knows that this is something that you're going to do, and make sure that when you're working with a provider, they know what medications you're on, they know your medical history, and there's someone who is savvy enough to ask these questions and know what these things mean. And yeah, use extreme caution. I don't know if it's something I even could myself recommend right now someone
Mm-hmm.
to go to. I don't do that at all anymore. If someone comes to me, absolutely, and is dead set on having an experience, I will direct them to what resources I can to help
Mm-hmm.
them. But I personally myself, like, at this point in time, do not recommend really anything to anyone, because everyone sort of has to come to this space on their own, and
Yeah.
when the time is right.
When they feel the calling.
When I feel a calling, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. Incredible conversation. I learned so much. And thank you for getting involved with this, because it will benefit us all in the end.
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for everything.
Thank you.